what is happening. Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little video that I found very particularly interesting, or at least all in all, that I would somewhat have a little bit of a conversation about it. I'm not really going to review the video because, all in all, I don't think that there's really much of a reason to. But I thought, all in all, that I would at least just talk about the video or talk about this conversation because I found it very particularly interesting. And the conversation that we're going to be talking about today is this one video that I've seen by Mr. Blueblood Sports TV. And of course, the conversation, of course, it was, is Mr. Canelo Alvarez and his legacy, is he being protected by that of the whole boxing world? And of course, when it comes down, there is a certain amount of these channels that may allege that about Mr. Canelo Alvarez. We've heard Dante's Boxing Nation and, Boxing Eagle, Aki TV, and a certain amount of these other channels, Champ Side, that of course are going to allege that Canelo Alvarez does get a certain amount of protection by the boxing media and by boxing in general because he, of course, has the complexion for the protection. Because, of course, a lot of these guys, when they take a look at Canelo Alvarez, they don't really count him as a Mexican fighter. They count him as a Caucasian Hispanic. And I get it to a certain degree. But, of course, Canelo, he is somewhat of a mixed demographic. But at the end of the day, what I will say is this. In this video, Mr. Blueblood Sports TV, basically what he was alleging, and I don't necessarily 100% disagree with what he had to say here, if overall certain events do end up transpiring this way. But of course, with the recent events that has to do with the two countries between that of Russia and that of the Ukraine, we all know that, of course, Russia has invaded them and that certain problems have arose. And of course, that certain countries and certain sports have decided not to sanction overall certain athletes from Russia. Now, apparently in boxing, at least with certain belts, this is only going to hold ground if you're a person that resides in one of the two countries. If you're, whether you reside in, the main country of Russia or Belarus, when it comes out, apparently those are the rules. So someone like an Artur B2B, for example, who I believe is of Russian descent and maybe was born in Russia but now lives in Canada, those rules are not going to apply to him. So in the video when Mr. Blueblood Sports TV said that Artur B2B, that, he's going to be barred from a unification fight, actually, I don't believe that that is to be true. I don't believe overall that that is the correct information. However, what I will say is this. Mr. Dimitri B2B, I believe, resides in St. Petersburg, Russia at the current moment in time. I do believe that he does reside in the country. And the question is, overall, even if Dimitri B2B, even if he is from the country of Russia, and overall, even if these sanctioning bodies, they say that they're not going to sponsor a Russian fighter, will they allow this fight to go on just because Canelo Alvarez is Canelo Alvarez? I certainly wouldn't be shocked. It's not that I think that, Canelo Alvarez, is just someone that necessarily gets away with everything. But when you are looked at basically as the face of the sport, when you are looked at as someone that pretty much brings in the most amount of money sales, or, as certain people would say, there is exceptions for exceptional people. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that if they're barring other Russian fighters that they should allow this for Canelo Alvarez. I'm just stating that more than likely, all in all, that is more than likely what is going to happen. That more than likely, maybe the fight, if it doesn't get sanctioned here, I've heard rumors that there could be a possibility that maybe they could fight in Abu Dhabi, which I do think overall would be a very decent location. I think that you can pretty much take Canelo Alvarez anywhere, almost fighting against anyone, as long as they're a decent caliber opponent, which Dimitri B2B is, in my opinion. And I think that the numbers are going to do very, very decently well. Now, of course, there's been certain channels like that at Boxing Eagle, for example, to where he even went as far to blame Canelo Alvarez for picking Dimitri B2B because he's a Russian opponent and recently what Russia was doing. But of course, in my opinion, that's going a little bit too far because I don't think Canelo Alvarez knew overall what Russia was going to do. And by the time he picked Dimitri B2B, Russia, maybe they invaded Ukraine, but no one really knew overall how serious this was actually going to be. So I think doing that is actually going a little bit too far. But we all know Mr. Boxing Ego, he don't like Mr. Canelo Alvarez in the first place. But the big question, of course, is should this fight happen when it comes down to it? If other Russian fighters are banned from certain title fights, or if the certain sanctioning bodies do not look at them as legitimate champions. Well, what I will say is this. What happens overall in one area should happen pretty much in all other areas as well. And I do think that there should be a level of consistency. Now, do I believe that more than likely that the Canelo Alvarez fight versus Dimitri B2B fight, do I believe that it'll be canceled? No, I don't believe that it'll be canceled. Because I think that Canelo Alvarez, I think that he's looking overall to chase history. And I think boxing, in a way, I think they do like Canelo Alvarez to be the face of the sport. But I don't necessarily mind overall this fight happening. And to be quite honest with you, is it very possible that a certain amount of these channels that overall, before they said that these Eastern European guys that, they were kind of these hype jobs, or they're these people that, weren't really that great. All of a sudden, when it comes to Canelo Alvarez facing a Russian fighter, all of a sudden it's a big issue. Could it be maybe because they see that Canelo Alvarez, if he's going to beat Artur B2B, that he's going to accomplish, Dimitri B2B, that he's going to accomplish a great amount of history, and they don't want him doing that overall for his own sake. It certainly could overall, be that way. But I understand overall Mr. Blue Blood Sports TV's opinion. I do understand where he's coming from, because if other fighters are restricted, say, from fighting Russian fighters or certain fighters from other countries, and let's say it costs them a belt, possibly, then of course the same rules should be somewhat stipulated to Canelo Alvarez. Do I think all in all that that will happen that way? No, more than likely I don't think that it'll happen that way. But we'll just have to see all in all what happens. But I thought also that I would talk about this a little bit, because even though I certainly understand Mr. Blue Blood Sports TV's opinion, and I certainly overall get where he's coming from, but another thing that he also said in the video was that, well, this is why Canelo Alvarez gets the backlash that he does. This is why, because he, the media treats him so differently and blah, blah, blah. I can't necessarily 100% agree with that. Now, that's not me saying that, that's a part of the reason why maybe Canelo Alvarez gets some of the backlash. I'm not saying that Canelo Alvarez is never protected by the media. You certainly can come up with a case and point that Canelo, that because of his image and all in all, because, he is looked at as the main cash cow, that of course he is going to get a certain amount of protection by the media and by boxing in general. I don't think that that's really something that, is super duper, just, unnatural to say, or something overall that would be completely inaccurate. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, a big part of the reason why Canelo Alvarez gets so much backlash by these channels is not because he's really a highly protected fighter. It's because all in all, they don't want him overall, someone like that, someone of that image, someone who could be counted as either a Caucasian Hispanic or a Hispanic fighter, to be the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. Because basically, the narratives that they try to spread about this dude, in my opinion, they're pretty much overall filled with stupidity. It just is what it is. I mean, the narratives all in all that they basically try to spread about Canelo Alvarez is basically, oh, he's only #1 pound-for-pound on many lists because he has the complexion for the protection. Terrence Crawford is really the real #1 pound-for-pound. But how is Terrence Crawford really the #1 pound-for-pound? Like these certain channels, even Blue Blood Sports TV, who I have a great deal of respect for, but never forget who Blue Blood Sports TV associates himself with, which is out of the LDBC, which is a pro-black boxing league. It just is what it is. That's what they are. So as soon as you associate yourself overall with that of the LDBC or new media, I already basically know what I need to know about you. It just is what it is. Once you sometimes associate yourself with certain groups, when it comes down to it, that basically tells me everything that I need to know about you. As the old saying goes, show me your friends and you show me yourself. It is what it is. Or basically, show me what you follow, show me what you believe in, and you show me you. It is what it is. So basically, Blue Blood Sports TV, even though I do have a great amount of respect for him, we all know overall where his allegiances truly lie. It is what it is. There's no offense against him, but it is what it is. But what I will say is this. I will have to agree with Mr. Blue Blood Sports TV that if there are going to be certain title fights put on hold overall with certain fighters, from fighters out of Belarus or that of Russia, that if that is going to be, on hold, especially in, certain places in America, that overall that it probably should be the same thing with Canelo Alvarez. Do I think that the same thing is going to happen to Canelo? No, because Canelo Alvarez, when it comes down to it, is not really going to hurt anyone's brand, because not only do I think that maybe this could possibly attract more attention to the fight because, Russia maybe is causing a little bit more issues right now, but on top of that, when it comes down to it, Canelo Alvarez, like I said, he could pretty much face anyone. Now, do I believe that Russian fighters in general really should be banned just because Vladimir Putin and the country or whatever is going on over there, they took evasive action, or they took overall, an abrasive act? No, I don't think so. But at the end of the day, I somewhat understand. At the end of the day, what I will say is this. I think that more than likely Canelo Alvarez and Dimitri B2B, I do believe that this fight is still going to go on, that it is still going to happen. I believe all in all that it's going to be a fantastic fight, and I can't complain about this fight happening, because I think that it is a fantastic fight. And to be honest with you, if this fight does not happen at the current moment in time, there's a very decent chance that, who knows, I'm not going to say that the fight would never happen, but I am going to say that it would be a little bit harder to make, in my opinion, a little bit later on down the road. So we'll see all in all what happens. But Mr. Artur B2B also, which Blue Blood Sports TV said in the video, that if I were to B2B, that, overall, if he were to end up, to get a unification fight, that he wouldn't be able to unify the titles. Well, apparently that's not true from the information that I have seen. Because Artur B2B, he's not someone overall that is actually residing in Russia at the current moment in time. That rule only applies to certain fighters that actually reside in Russia at the time, which of course Dimitri B2B, from what I heard, does. So we'll see on what ends up happening with this fight. But anyways, it'll be very interesting. More than likely, the Canelo versus Dimitri B2B fight, in my view, is going to stay at hand. I think that it's a fantastic fight. I think that it's a great fight. Let me also bring up this point as well, and I may bring up this point in another video as well, because I had one commentator in my comments section, and I understood somewhat where he was coming from, but I just didn't think it was a good point. He basically was bringing up the point, basically saying, oh, but this generation is trash of boxing. Canelo Alvarez, who has, almost 60 fights on his record, he's facing someone that doesn't even have 20 fights on his record, because, of course, Dimitri B2B is 19-0. He doesn't have any more than 19 fights. And my response basically is that you do have certain fighters that, yes, even though they may not have more than 20 fights on their record, they're overall very, very decent boxers. Just because you see a boxer, when it comes down to it, overall that has more fights on their record doesn't always mean that they're going to be the greater boxer. And I brought up certain fighters overall that had very good amateur pedigrees, and even though they had a small amount of fights, but they were regarded in very high fashion because we all know that they're very decent boxers. Fighters like Agina Morigandau at his prime, Vasily Lomachenko, and Alexander Usyk, who's one of the best fighters in the world. A fighter like a Josh Taylor, who's one of the best fighters in the world. Sometimes just because a fighter has lesser fights doesn't mean all in all that they're a worse fighter, or it doesn't mean that they're not a great fighter. There's many fighters out there today that, it's just how the times are. It is what it is. You have certain fighters out there like an Alexander Usyk, who are more skilled than certain people who have 40 fights on their record. It just is what it is. So, trying to diminish this fight, by whatever means necessary, in my view, it's not going to work, because for those of us that know who Dimitri B2B is, Dimitri B2B is a great fighter. So it just is what it is. But anyways, that's really all about it for this video. I just thought that I would talk about that because I found it very particularly interesting. And that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.